Right now, I am going to start reading the Odyssey, and I don't have any idea what it is about. But let's see. Okay, one of the most revered poets and thinkers of all time. Virtually nothing is available in the history that throws conclusive light on Homer as a person. It may be so far the obvious reasons of elapsed time, some 9 or 8 centuries, since he composed the epics, the Odyssey and the Iliad. Homer was probably an Ionian and thought to be blind. His words were carried forward orally by the bards patronized by the succeeding rulers of the region. The epics of Homer offer insight into the Greek traditions, myths, legends, their gods, and the history of the cosmos. They are regarded as sacrosanct and relate to very identity of the land. Homer's two epics form the basis of Greek education and culture in the classical age. They were the mainstay of Greek humanistic learning right up to the advent of the Roman Empire and through the era witnessing the outspread of Christianity. The version of the Odyssey is an intentional edited, genuine translation, not a paraphrase nor retold tale at the same time and within the rules I have set myself. I have done my best to humor is reading for those who are unfamiliar with the Greek. Well, nevertheless, they are bound to find her much strange humorous layers in Odyssey, but now he is from the established chapter to introduction. Okay. The version of the Odyssey is the intention at any rate, a genuine translation, not a paragraph, it's not a nor a retold tale. At the same time, within the rules I have set myself, Hello, hello, mic check 1, 2, 3. Anyways, let's go. Autograph is not a retail told tale. At the same time, and within the rules I have set myself, I have done my best to make Homer easy reading for those who aren't familiar with the Greek. Nevertheless, they are about to find their much that a strange, and I beg them to bear with me patiently through a few preliminary pages so that I may provide them beforehand with the answer or to some at least of the question that will occur to the realm as the Homer's Iliad Odyssey have from time to time afforded a first-class battleground for scholars in the 19th century. In particular, German critics were at endless pains to show not only that the two works are not the product of a single brain, but each is a piece of intricate and rather ill-sewn patchwork. In this process, Homer disappeared. By now, he has been firmly reestablished on his throne, as his readers may feel assured that they are in one hand and they do when they turn to as you like after reading King John. But this restoration depends on judicious re-examination of the entire evidence and has brought little light to light about the man whose his life. It is beyond questions that he is the earliest surviving Greek writer, probably that he lived in 10th century before Christ in one or other of the cities which the Greeks had established and the Aegean coast of Asia Minor, and quite likely that he actually committed his poems to writing, thought that art was still perhaps hardly not save the minstrel fraternity to which he belonged, the rest, including his blindness, his legend or guesswork, and the reader who tries to glean from his poem something of the man as apart from his art will find himself baffled by the most impersonal and objectives of authors. Iliad and Odyssey are twin aspects of a single theme, the story of the Trojan War and its aftermath. Together they constitute the first expression of the Western mind in literary form, the earliest that all events which we possess for it will be obvious even to those who read them in translation that two such masterpieces could not have sprung into being without artistic antecedents in form. They are epic poems, but it will perhaps make their content clearer to the modern reader if I describe the Iliad as a tragedy and the Odyssey as a novel. It is the Iliad that we hear for the first time, the authentic voice of the tragic muse, while the Odyssey, with its all well-knit plot, its psychological interest, and its interplay of character, is the true ancestor of the long line of novels that have followed it, and though it is the first, I am not sure that it is not still the best. Let the new reader decide for himself. Each of these two poems, complete and independent, is a work of art and with atmosphere of its own. Yet, as we have seen, the shared common background in the Trojan War of this war, something must now be said. The city of Troy or Ilium, which is Homer's account, was besieged for 10 years and finally sacked by Greek king Agamemnon and his faithful supporters had been identified by archaeologists with his an ancient settlement near the coast of the Aegean in the northwest corner of Asia Minor, whose remains show traces of repeated demolition and rebuilding. It is quite likely that a marauding force from European Greek plays a destructive part in its life. But this is not to say that Homer's account is to be taken as history. Homer was neither a historian nor an archaeologist. The very ideas of history and archaeology were non-existent on his day, and we shall be far nearer to the truth if we regard him as having worked up as mass as and a mass of legendary and mythical material of very ancient date and well known to his heroes in the similar historical date. His heroes and heroines were the supposed ancestors of the noble before whom he recited his poems. It fled. It flattered his audience to hear of their lofty deeds and, in the absence of genuine pedigrees and records, to imagine these divinely descended and godlike beings as separated from themselves by only a few generations. But in my view, at any rate, they are mythical and almost historical value to us lives, not in his attempt to describe an actual past, but in the picture which is the course of these attempts. He cannot help thinking of his life and manners on his face. Before introducing the reader to the scene he will meet with the Odyssey, we must briefly describe the action of the Iliad, which is no more than an episode in 10 years' age of Troy. The ships of the Greek expeditionary force and lined up on the beach. Troops are encamped in huts beside them. The fighting takes place in a rolling plain between these huts and the city walls. Agamemnon, son of Atreus, the Greek overlord, with his brother Menelaus of Sparta, has introduced the princess whom owe him alliance to join forces with him against Troy and Priam, its king, because Paris, one of Priam's many sons, has abducted Menelaus' wife, the beautiful Helen. The narrative covers only the short period of Achilles' withdrawal from fighting after a quarrel with Agamemnon. Agamemnon, his resumption of arms, and the death of his hands of the Trojan prince. Hector, whose body is recovered from Achilles for burial by the personal efforts of his father, King Priam, with Hector's funeral daylight ends. Homer left it to the lesser epic poets who followed him to fill the story out at either end. His own work he resumed in the Odyssey, which through the many of backward look at the actual fighting starts of point of the tenth. After the ends and deals with the adventure of the Greek champions on their homeward way. All the principal heroes are carefully accounted for, but the fate of one them Odysseus, king of I- Ithaca, an island of the western coast of Greece, is for artistic purposes selected as the central theme. Menelaus, Agamemnon, and Nestor received special treatment. The adventure of Menelaus indeed are given at such length in Book 4, and bear so suggestive a resemblance to those of Odysseus that we are tempted to think that in the material in his disposal, Homer found the legend of the wandering, the material of his disposal, Homer found the legend of its attached the names of both Menelaus and Odysseus, and gave us two versions of the tale. At any rate, this is puzzle here for gave us two versions of the tale. At any rate, this is puzzle here for those who would have us believe the pair of are historical figures. Incidentally, it is noteworthy that apart from that of Priam's daughter Cassandra, Homer, who shows such meticulous care in winding up the Greece side of the business, concerns himself not at all with the destinies of the Trojan and their allies of the Czech. But to return to the Odyssey, I am not going to spoil my readers' pleasures by analysis of the plot. Homer is the world's best storyteller, and I can safely leave them in his hands. A few words, however, on the opening scenes may not come amiss. The tale begins with a council of Olympian gods, of whom more anon in the 10th year of the fall of Troy. Zeus takes the chair and comments first of the faith, and Agamemnon murdered on his return from Troy by Clytemnestra, his wife, and her lover. I'm actually um looking about Troy, like what was it? Because I'm not sure. But the sugar so journey becomes very hard. Okay, I got it now. I know a little bit about Troy. So Troy by Clytemnestra is often a lover. Aegisthus, a tragic tale which Homer introduces here and many times. A few words, however, on the opening scene may not come amiss. The tale begins with the Council of Olympian Gods, of whom Anon begins with the Council of Olympian Gods, of whom more Anon in the 10th year after the fall of Troy. Zeus takes the chair and comments first to the faith of Agamemnon and murdered in his return. His wife and her lover. Augustus, a tragic tale which Homer introduces her and many times again by way of pointing the contrast between Clytemnestra's infamy and the sterling virtue of Guinevere. Odysseus' queen next Odysseus himself is discussed. It is felt that this unhappy wanderer, who mainly through the amenity of the sea got persuaded, as for 10 years failed to reach home in Ithaca, should be brought back to his kingdom at the moment he returned against his will in the remote island of Ogygia by Calypso, a lesser goddess whom has 7 years exercised her charms in vain upon him in that book 5, that we first met him and not till book 9, that we hear what he did in the first 3 years of his 10 years, wandering after the shack of Troy. Meanwhile, to return to book I, after suggesting that Hermes, the envoy of the gods, should be dispatched to release Odysseus, the goddess Athena, Odysseus' champion and protector, visits his place in Ithaca to steer his young son Telemachus to take active steps towards the discovery of his long-lost father, or failing this, to bring to an end the intolerable situation that has arisen during his long absence. For we find that his faithful wife Penelope is besieged in her own house by a host of amorous and ambitious princelings from Ithaca itself and the neighboring nations, each eager to win the still attractive queen and even more eager to step into King Odysseus' shoes. It is the doom of these suitors that is slowly but surely worked upon in the magnificent climax of book. But I undertook to introduce the reader only to the opening scene, nor having done this, do I propose to add one more manipulations of the Odyssey that have been when I will content myself by drawing his attention to one or two aspects of Homer's genius which have struck me with even greater force during the long period of intimate study which translation involves than they did when I tackled him as a task at school. I put first the extraordinary insight, delicacy, and the truth with which he handled his relation members of the other sex. I cannot simply say woman, for at least three goddesses are involved. Though there are by no means the less feminine for being given. The Princess Nausicaa is peculiarly attractive figure to modern readers. Some of steeped in the traditions of her fiction may regret Homer's failure to pursue Nausicaa's romance to a more exciting conclusion, or may console ourselves by reading a broken heart into her last words with Ulysses. But Homer was neither a sanctioned romantic nor resolution realistic, with the happy result that this picture of Nausicaa is fresh and lovely now as when it was painted 3,000 years ago. Next, in an age which, in spite of too savage war, is too ready to look askance of the barbarity of its predecessors and to censure the occasional brutalities that Homer seems to condone, I cannot help dwelling on the tenderness which he expresses, or rather in some subtle manner causes us to feel. For all those whom fate or their own follies have affiliated, afflicted, or cast down, I am thinking of the luckless young Elpenor, not much of finding man, nor very strong in the head of the woman slave, hunting for in the hand meal, who was not so vigorous at the rest of the stricken Calypso's element of Odysseus' mother, pinning in heartache for his wife and gentle ways of the dead virtuous and Epiphanes destroyed before the down came curling on their cheeks. A Cassandra's dying cry, which lingered as so long, is years of the lonely sorrow. making herself out in vain to meet Odysseus of the faithful Aeneas, braving the inclement night to save with the speech of his phenomenous cut of the which of its successful grandma Elmimus with her gentle darts of the Phenimus, a truly decent fellow who had warning but did not heard of a dog Agus too old and weak to greet his master more than a wage of tale of the little birds who met that where they only looked for sleep on the shores of the Pacific. Following the endeavor down the dark paths of decay of Odysseus' old father, Icarus expressing his misery in rustic clothes and the blinded Cyclops with his words of endearment of his darling name. Perhaps the most interesting case of all for your Homer actually succeeds in enlisting our sympathy for a cruel and disgusting monster and sorrows limited of his own hero such as Shakespeare's Tempest. The more our hearts are wrung for the unfortunate Caliban, the more truly do we dislike the ruthless monsters who works upon him. By now I have at least mentioned the chief human actors in the tale. It remains for me to repair an omission and say something of the galaxy of Olympian gods whom the reader is faced with all the very beginning of the poem will meet as individuals and almost every page. This is no place for disquisition of the Greek religion, but is worth while before describing these gods of their functions to pause for a moment and inquire what Homer's attitudes towards there was. Okay, I'm still on introduction, so I'll stop here and I'll continue later on. So let's see how it is going to be like. Is it actually good? Let's find out. Like I know the movie is coming after 2 months, but I was like, I should definitely read the story. Like, let's find out what is even about. So, anyways, bye.